So next, I'll introduce our keynote speaker today. Dr. Bradley Flowers will discuss the state of air quality in the Houston region. Dr. Flowers is an associate vice president with AECOM with over 20 years of experience as a physical chemist and environmental scientist specializing in air quality monitoring. Dr. Flowers leads teams of field and data scientists to deliver high-quality, actionable environmental data. Please welcome him to the stage. Dr. Bradley Flowers.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank HGAC and the organizers for the invitation. A lot of this information is up to date, and a number of us have been working on it for a very long time. So it's a pleasure to come today and talk to, I think, almost entirely new faces about the air quality in Houston. I will candidly admit I moved into air quality monitoring earlier in my career, and one of the first projects I worked on had to do with an air quality study around the Beijing Olympics. So there are these, I didn't think about it till this morning, but these mega sports events really do precipitate interesting side effects. And I'll also candidly admit, every 4 years, for a short time, I become a soccer fan. So it works in surprising ways. What I want to talk about now is the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, just define some of them and which ones are relevant in Houston, which ones are particularly relevant in Houston. We've got a long record of data that goes back in certain audiences. When I say back to the 1990s, that sounds like a long time. When I say it to myself, it doesn't sound like it was all that long ago. Then there's some Texas-specific information that we have, and then a short summary. Not all that long ago, we had the happy, statistic of Houston was one of the largest cities in the country that only failed to meet one of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. I took a not insignificant amount of pride in that internally, but what's the case is there are different standards for different chemicals. They've evolved over the years. The ones that we'll talk about today is an 8-hour ozone standard, and that's the fourth highest 8-hour maximum concentration in a year, averaged over 3 years. The newest and most controversial, maybe more nascently controversial, is the lowering of the PM 2.5 primary standard. Some time ago it was 15 micrograms per cubic meter, then lowered to 12, and now lowered to 9. And then for a matter of completeness, I included the secondary standard for PM 2.5 in this chart as well. There are, lead, PM10, SO2, and carbon monoxide. There are some other standards, but they're not, the data is not so interesting, not as interesting as this. So I left in here a reference to the EPA website where you can find more information about other ambient air quality standards. This is another chart. It looks pretty good here. I was a little worried about it because of the scale. This is at least one version of the region's ambient air monitoring network. And I wanted to point out, because of the longstanding ozone issue and the relatively unique situation that Houston's in with the large industrial ship channel and the large amount of industrial activity, you can kind of look through this and see, there's a higher concentration of monitors around the ship channel, and then throughout Harris County, it becomes more of a regional picture, and then there's some community and industry-sponsored networks down in the Texas City area, and then also in Freeport. So shown here is Harris County, the city of Houston, TCEQ, and then in red, the locations of the two privately sponsored air monitoring networks. And it's shown as a note to demonstrate the coverage of the area and to highlight the collaboration between these organizations. So we've talked about what we're going to measure and where we're going to measure it. I'm ready to talk about some data. So let's first talk about ozone. I'll remind you that ozone is not a primarily emitted pollutant, right? It's not a product of combustion. It's not a product of respiration or anything like this. It's formed in the atmosphere as a result of three things: an amount of volatile organic chemicals, and there's a tremendously complicated amount of sources and sinks of VOCs. The other thing that you need to create ozone in the atmosphere is nitrogen oxides. This is also got a complicated amount of sources, and these things come together on a sunny day, on a warm sunny day with little or no wind, and you get not only the formation of ozone, but you get an accumulation of ozone, and that leads to 8-hour average values greater than that design value. And in Houston, we get 20 to 30 to 40 of these days a year, and we have, that's a straight, sort of a simplified story about how we have an ozone issue in Houston. So I mentioned, at least for PM 2.5, it's also the case for ozone, that the standard has reduced over the years. It started out in the 90s, and the 8-hour standard was 84 parts per billion, dropped to 75 parts per billion, and then now to 70 parts per billion. So that is what some of my colleagues refer to as the goal line. That's the value that if the measurements sit below, the federal government, at least the federal government would consider the air, it would be an attainment area. It would attain the ambient air standard for ozone. And if you look a little closer, you can see that, the design value was kind of stable during this period. The standard was lowered, and the design value dropped. The state put emission controls on stationary sources. We probably don't idle our cars as much. There's an emphasis on public transportation, things like this that happen, and the design value drops. And it's been more or less stable throughout the last 10 or so years until we hit 23 and 24. And I mentioned in that previous slide, there's clear low winds and clear skies. In 23, we had a heat dome for several months. We were seeing ozone exceedances area-wide. If you go on the TCEQ page, all of the air monitors for ozone in the state are listed with the same timing, and you can put this report out, and you can see most of the air monitors in the state were going over the standards. So we had these phenomenons in 23 and 24 that acerbated the pollution issue. Okay, so great. Ozone is a function of precursor concentration. So I mentioned NOx and VOC. And so we've also got a long-term record of those concentrations in the area. My primary activity is working for the Houston Regional Monitoring Network. That's shown here as HRM. Coming soon is a slide that shows where the HRM sites are. They were sort of covered up in that previous slide. And then what we refer to as the core monitors, these are long-term TCQ monitors that exist at Clinton Drive, Lang, up in Aldine, and over in Deer Park. So this is the annual average NOx concentration for about the last 10 years, and it's largely been stable. There's not an increase that would correspond with an increase in ozone or anything like that. And what's more is when you look backwards into even the late 80s, you see that the NOx concentrations at those monitors have dropped off for several years, and over the last maybe 4 or 5 have been fairly stable. So the NOx controls in the area and public transportation and vehicle fleet turnover, all these kinds of things are working to reduce the amount of NOx in the air. So I like that we're from Houston. I know we like to find things that make us unique in different ways. And one of the things that makes us unique is the amount of what's called highly reactive VOC. I show this here as HRVOC. These are chemicals that typically a VOC in the atmosphere makes between 1 and maybe 2 ozone molecules as it's oxidized. HRVOCs, I think, start around 6 and can go up even to 13 ozones as they're oxidized. So we're looking at highly volatile things with carbon-carbon double bonds, very reactive chemicals that are unique to some of the industrial areas in town. In the last 10 years or so, there's been a little bit of a change in the way that these are monitored. After 2021, 4 additional automatic gas chromatographs were added to the area. I'll describe that technology in a little bit, but generally you add some measurements to the area, and it's not unexpected that the concentrations would rise. But largely over the last 10 years, this amount of HRVOC is relatively stable. And then again, plotted backwards in time to the early 2000s, where these measurements began area-wide. And we also see a large decrease in concentration as different air quality control strategies have been implemented in the area. So there are 17 of these devices operating in the area now. I want to say they probably started with maybe 2 or 5. So they're in a lot of places, and you get a very high quality speciated data set from these. The other chemical that we think about a lot is BTEX. That stands for benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, and the X is a number of xylene isomers. These are also industrial emissions. You get them from vehicles. A lot of different things emit BTEX. And I guess I was so proud of this slide that I put 20 years instead of 10. I meant to show 10. But the case is, on an annual average area basis in the HRM network over the last 20 years, we've averaged between 0.9 and 1.5, 1.8. So a sustained low amount of BTEX. This data set is from a slightly different measurement technique. There's an evacuated canister. The clock strikes midnight, a valve turns, and air gets pulled into this steel canister. The clock goes all the way around till midnight. The valve is turned off, and this is sent to a laboratory for analysis. And there's 150 different VOCs are measured in that in that process. You might have guessed the trend over the last 20 years is equally positive. In these HRM sites are situated in neighborhoods very close to the ship channel. And so over the years, we've seen a large reduction in VTEX as well. So we feel pretty good about the levels of the precursors. The issue appears to be with the secondary chemistry and the meteorology that keeps ozone accumulated in the area. But that's one thing. And the other emerging issue mentioned in the next slide and now is particulate matter. I really like this slide. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. It starts out with looking at sand. There's some images here of sand at the beach, and that's about 90 microns, 70 microns or so is the diameter of a human hair. Some of the larger particles in the atmosphere, dust and pollen, these kinds of things, are called PM10. They're particles that are 10 microns and smaller. And then the real interesting particles are, not that the other particles aren't interesting, the particularly interesting particles are these 2.5 micron sized particles. They're small enough that if they're emitted in the air, they're sustained long enough that they can participate in surface chemistry, so they can change composition as they're transported through the air. Every year we see Saharan dust blow into town and things like this. That's usually PM 2.5. These are monitored again close to the center of town, around the ship channel area, and so there's a fairly comprehensive regulatory network there. The first data trend to show is the reference monitor. These are devices that are filters that are weighed, sampled, and then analyzed. And here's the trend in the design value, the standard that I was talking about. And then in 2024, lowered to 9. After about 2018, 2019, the FRM data in the area began to trend up. This is through last year. These are another flavor of monitors, a continuously operating monitor. And we see, for those of us that follow this, familiar North Wayside and North Loop, some sites that are high on the PM side, and then a number of monitors throughout the area that unfortunately are above 9. And then Seabrook and Galveston, the vacation areas, I guess, have a little less particulate. The 24-hour data from the TCQ network, when the chemistry and the toxicology was reviewed for the NACs, the PM 2.5 NACs, the EPA did not lower the 24-hour average NACs, and Houston performs fairly well against that standard. Briefly, I need to talk about air toxics. Here's that map of the automated gas chromatographs I was referring to, and the ship channel monitors. Particularly important are the red circles and the black triangles. Those are the automated GCs. They produce 1-hour data that you can compare against a 1-hour guideline. The 1-hour AMCV TCQ promulgates a number of these, and they're reviewed by the toxicology group. So the one I want to talk about today is the long-term AMCV. These are the ship channel, 14 of the area, 17 area auto GCs, and their annual benzene concentrations for the last several years plotted against the 1.4 part per billion AMCV. Butadiene, highly volatile, highly reactive, and its AMCV is 9.1, and the levels in the area are all and have all been below 1 part per billion on an annual average basis for quite some time. So Houston has the most extensive air quality monitoring network in the country. The results I've talked about here are from part of it, but there's several other organizations that participate in air quality monitoring. The Air Alliance Houston network has an additional 25 monitors. The Harris County Community Air Monitoring Program has an additional 21. There's a number of industrial groups participating in fence line monitoring. That data is publicly available. And I'm happy to say that our organization has collaborated with Harris County and the City of Houston at various times over the years. There's a number of organizations that study air quality. Today, we're going to hear from people that operate mobile vans and study pollution exposure, people that apply satellite data to different kind of exposure and epidemiology studies. Every summer, some colleague of mine from the past is in town to study air quality through some sort of federal study. Baylor University, the University of Houston, and the TCQ all do air quality studies. The ozone, obviously, from the data I showed, is a long-term issue. PM2.5 is additionally complicated. Living in town means you're aware of pollution thanks to things like the EDF pollution tracker. There's a lot of environmental justice and community engagement opportunities and organizations in town that operate. Our colleagues at Houston Area Research Center develop toolkits and other kinds of community engagement programs, and it's just a great town to be involved in air quality. Every February, Houston becomes a rodeo town. Every summer, it's a baseball town, hopefully this fall too. Next summer, it's going to be a football town, but I would tell you Houston's an air quality town too. So thank you.
Yes, if you want to take.
If there's a minute, I would take one.
Yeah.
But
Are there any questions for Dr. Flowers? We have microphones set up here in the center and right at the back of the first section. So,
and Rice University participates too.
Two questions.
Yeah, two quick questions. One is, do you have a reason why NOx and VOC have stopped declining the past 10 years? And second question, I noticed that Clinton Drive is not anywhere close to the highest PM in the region, yet it's the only monitor where we have speciation data. Is there any move to get speciation data from other PM monitors?
Speciation data is measurements conducted in a way that allow for the composition of the particles to be determined. There is a short data set available at that North Wayside monitor, but it's complicated, it's expensive, and I think people are moving that way, but I'm not aware of if a wave of money is coming to town. I'm not aware of it for that sort of support. So the NOx and the VOCs, I think the ozone graph had a population component, and I think, as vehicle fleets are turning over, maybe the engines are getting cleaner, but the number is growing. I think vehicle miles traveled is increasing. I think that the stationary sources are somewhat stable over the last 10 years, so I'm not aware of a thing that would drop them in that way.
Well, first I want to say thanks a whole bunch. I've really been educated, and as Andrew knows, I ask a lot of questions. So I just have one or two for you. I'll just do with one right now. With all of the devices we have out there measuring, it would be nice to know what level actually kills kids, adults, asthmatics. And we see the numbers up there, but I'm not able to correlate what's healthy and what's not unhealthy, and what's unhealthy.
I see. Well, that's what the air quality standards nominally do, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, but it's,
But aren't those politically set?
I was gonna say, it's frankly more complicated than that.
Dexter, our next presentation will be talking about health.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, excuse my lack of technical expertise, but the devices that you have measuring the pollutants in the air, you indicated that you had one at some point and now they've increased to 16 or so. Has the quality actually improved, or is it just that the numbers are now blended because the canisters are collecting data from more clean areas?
That could be answered quickly, but I don't have anything prepared today to address that. You could look at one site and look at that. I know that there was, you can kind of see it, I guess. There was an uptick in BTEX in 1 year. If you noticed in the 2024 BTEX slide, that was due to one measurement at one site. So sometimes there can be a strong enough event to move the average, but it would require, I think, I mean, and done most properly, you know, looking at individual sites instead of the average. All right, y'all, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Flowers.